with tribute to Mahatma Gandhi. And of course yesterday, the 2nd of October, was the commemoration of his birthday. He was born on the 2nd of October 1869. And actually in 2007 the United Nations declared the 2nd of October an International Day of Nonviolence. And this programme is in honour of that as well. So a warm welcome to you all this evening. Is anyone here at the university for the first time? Okay, an extra special warm welcome to you. My name is Matthew. I've been studying Raj Yoga meditation, which is taught here at the Brahma Kumaris World Spiritual University for the last 10 years. And very much at the core of those teachings and that practice is the principle of non-violence, and that's what we're going to be exploring tonight. And as the video at the end made a call to all of us to actually find that principle and that value within us to be able to lead lives which are non-violent and respectful towards each other and everything else in the planet. So it's my privilege tonight to be facilitating conversation between two wonderful souls, Dr. Atul Shah and Sister Maureen Goodman. Just to give you an overview of the programme, we'll be having a conversation till around 8:10, and then you'll get the opportunity also to put questions to them as well. And then around 8:25 we'll close with a meditation and then announcements to finish. Does that sound okay? Yeah, good. Okay. Just a couple of house things. If I could ask you, those so-called smartphones, if you could put them onto silent, that would be most appreciated. If you need the toilets, they're straight out of the doors at the back, towards the left, and in the very unlikely event there's a fire, also the back door's the best way out, and the ushers would guide you from there. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Dr. Atul Shah and Sister Maureen to join me on stage. To be honest, if I tried to cover their resumes, it would take the rest of the evening. But just by way of a brief introduction, Dr. Atul Shah is basically a community and business leader who's done a lot of inspirational work, also a lecturer, a university lecturer, very concerned about the education of the young people and teaching them how to bring non-violence into their lives. Particularly, he's the CEO and founder of Diverse Ethics, which works with business leaders and organisational leaders to actually inspire and to open up their minds towards this whole subject of non-violence and how to apply it practically in their work and in their lives. Also a broadcaster. He did a very innovative tour, the Masala tour, around the UK, travelled 1,500 miles in about 3 weeks, to promote the wonderful diversity that's to be found in the Indian British community. And so, welcome, Dr. Shah. Very, very pleased to have you here.
Thank you, pleasure to be here.
And Sister Maureen. Sister Maureen is actually the Director of Programs for the Brahma Kumaris in the UK and has been following the path of Raj Yoga since the 1970s and has done a lot of work with outreach for the university, making connections and developing relationships with lots of different groups, educational, women's issues, also prison service, and a worldwide speaker, much sought after, helping to bring harmony wherever she travels. And so I'll leave the introductions there, as I say, because they could really go on. And so, exploring this topic of non-violence, we've obviously been chatting earlier and realised what a huge topic it is. And we've got a brief period tonight to explore it. I'm sure it's going to be fascinating. But I guess a logical... Oh yes, sorry, yes. Dr. Shah would actually like to start the evening with a prayer before we commence, so please join us in this.
Om Shanti. It's in the Jain tradition that we start, especially events like this, where we're talking about a very profound subject, with a prayer. So I will recite it first and then I'll give you a short translation. Shivamastu sarva jagata parahita nirta bhavantu bhutagana dosha prayantu nasam sarvatra sukhi bhavatu loka. The prayer means that, simply that, may all living beings on the universe be happy and free. I would also just like to say a brief word of thanks to the Brahmakumari for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. I think in the subject of non-violence, whilst we're talking about it and discussing it, the very actions of the Brahmakumaris in this country and throughout the world speak volumes in terms of the way in which they are practicing and promoting peace. So it's really a special honor to be here to speak about that subject. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the prayer, and it's an honor to have you here as well. So, this topic of non-violence, it sort of makes sense to start with a definition of non-violence, really. But rather than just ask the question flat, what is non-violence? I'm interested in hearing from you both about your own experience and how you've used this principle of non-violence in your lives. But even before that, is that what's inspired you to want to follow this principle of non-violence? And I know, starting with you, Dr. Shah, that you follow the Jain path. I don't know if everybody knows the Jain religion. It's something that actually was new to me 10 years ago. But maybe if you could share a little bit about how following that path has inspired you, because a very strong part of the Jain principle is non-violence, isn't it?
Yeah. The Sanskrit word for non-violence is ahimsa, and it's a central tenet of the Jain faith. I think really my childhood, because I was brought up in a strongly Jain household, my childhood was influenced by peace and love all around me. And not just in the family, but also in the community, in the school. And I was born in Mombasa, in Kenya. And really, I mean, I didn't think it was any special. I thought all children were brought up that way. And all children had that kind of atmosphere and experience. I came here when I was 18 to go to university. And I think that's when my first kind of real doubt started, because suddenly, I was in a very different place and lots of questions were being asked about me and my culture, and quite often I had to be on the defensive. And that's, I think, and that kind of dialogue made me also understand and realize how rich my inheritance was, my cultural and philosophical inheritance. And even today, I still find that I still get a lot of delight in meeting people who, praise my faith and my culture, because there's still a lot of ignorance about it, because we are generally not good at explaining the philosophy to others. But so that's, I think so. For me, as a child it wasn't, but the non-violence, I don't like the word non. And also, of course, the violence. I mean, my definition of it would be unconditional love, the positive aspect of it. And and I'm not sure, like the word ahimsa, if you translate it literally, it means means non, and hinsa means violence. So it means literally non-violence. But I think if you look at it within the wider Indian psyche and context, then it is very much about compassion.
Okay, thank you. Sister Maureen, I mean, you were born into the Jewish faith. I've been following this path, the Raj Yoga path, since the 1970s. So for you, what's been the experience of your connection with non-violence, or unconditional love, should I say?
Yeah, I like that definition. But I first also want to say how much I've appreciated the connection that the Brahma Kumaris have had with the Jain community in this country and different countries around the world. And I think we've had a connection for over 25 years. We've worked together. And I think it's been this common devotion, if you like, to that path of non-violence that has enabled that to happen. And so, yes, it's people need to know more about your community, definitely.
I mean, Mahatma Gandhi was strongly influenced by the Jain faith in developing his own philosophy of non-violence. So I think that's where probably you thought of bringing this topic in. And the philosophy is very, very deep and very profound. And the psychoanalysis of violence in the Jain tradition is quite, I think many scientists and psychologists could learn a lot from that. I was just giving an example earlier about a prayer we have in our tradition called Iriya Vaya. Because, first the Jain philosophy of compassion includes all living beings, right? So not just human beings. And that's quite important. We don't feel that we can have peace as human beings at the expense of animals or nature, for example. That, all living beings are important and worthy of respect. And peace has to be inclusive, not exclusive. And the psychology is that, like in our prayers, we ask for forgiveness for hurting all different types of beings, knowingly or unknowingly. And we go through it in quite a lot of detail. Like those with 1 senses, those with 2 senses, those with 3 senses, those with 4 senses, those with 5 senses. I may have kicked them, rolled them, hurt them, and so on and on. It's called Iriya Vaya. And we're supposed to recite this daily when we do our samai. So, some people may find that kind of very extreme, but I just thought that for you to understand, okay, in the Jain philosophy, there is a very profound kind of study and analysis and then practice of non-violence and compassion towards all living beings. There are whole rituals around that, there are meditations, prayers.
Thank you. Yes, as you said, I was brought up in the Jewish tradition, but then, so I think I was really introduced to the idea of non-violence later on in life as a way of life. And I think since childhood I'd always been very aware that I wanted to stay true to my conscience. I was very aware of listening to my conscience as much as I could. And then when I understood this whole, or started to understand the whole philosophy of non-violence, because of course it's a very deep philosophy that you understand more and more deeply as you progress along that spiritual path. It seemed to take my conscience to a deeper level, and I felt as if I was understanding truth more deeply. And for me, non-violence, I love the definition of unconditional love, respect for all, but it's really about not harming any living being, even in your thoughts. And so people sometimes think about non-violence as being, well, let me not go to war, or let me not, get angry even, so violence in words. But we sometimes don't realize how our thoughts create an atmosphere that can cause harm or sorrow. So if I'm with somebody and I may not say anything, but I have a thought of I'm criticizing them internally, I don't like them, or I feel they haven't done the right thing, or I'm questioning them, but they shouldn't do that, why are they doing that? That vibration reaches the person and can make them feel a level of discomfort. And where there's discomfort, I've seen for myself, seen with others, you close down in some way. And so that potential for good in you also gets suppressed a little. And I think we do this in our dynamic of relationships a lot. And so when I think of nonviolence, I think it's also at that level of thought and communication in the unseen as well as seen. And I think when I met the Brahma Kumaris, I saw people who were very sincerely trying to practice these things in every area of their life. You know, it wasn't just for teaching, or it wasn't just for doing at work, it was from morning till night, you know. And I've seen our elder sisters who are now, our university's headed by women, and our elder sisters now in their 80s and 90s, and you know, I've seen them, spiritual leaders, they have no privacy. I've seen them, obviously as a female, I would be able to see them getting up, going to bed, that perhaps brothers wouldn't see, but you know, I've seen them at every stage of their day, and there isn't a change in the way in which they live or talk to people or deal with people, whether you're close to them or you know, don't know them so well. And so that sort of alignment, that consistency, you know, that made me feel, well, I want that kind of thing in my life too, and the world needs this. So it inspired me very much to move in that direction.
Okay, thank you. So a lot of subtle realizations and work.
Yeah, ongoing process,
Yeah.
that's what to say.
Yeah. So, Dr. Shah, I mean, how have you found that in terms of what you've actually done? Because you're involved in, like Sister Maureen, there's a lot of different projects to help the community in different ways. And I know you do a lot of work helping business, because business has such a big impact on everything in the world these days. How is your passion for unconditional love affected the choices you've made in how you use your time, where you put your energy? Because looking with the limited research I've done, you have devoted a lot of time to try and help different areas of community follow this path and to see how it can be beneficial, not just for everyone else around them, but for them too. So do you want to say?
Yeah, I mean, I used to do a job in inverted commas, but I found it did not connect with my core values. So I've always felt that I want to practice what I preach. So I've tried to do work and projects which enable me to do that and to be able to express my values and live with my values. I mean, I've done a lot of very different things at the community level, at an organizational level, at a professional level. Like this video, we've also been quite creative, because you know, when I came to the country in 1980, that time there was no kind of youth movement in the community, and I had lots of questions. You know, young people, as always, have lots of questions and lots of doubts as well. So all I did was really create a forum where we could, as young people, ask questions. It was called the Young Jains. And what we did was we were quite open-minded, so we would work with different organizations where we felt that either they had answers or they had interesting ways of addressing those questions. And we learned a huge amount from the Brahma Kumaris because of their approach, their creativity. See, one of the advantages of old religions is that there is a lot of depth. One of the disadvantages is that quite often old religions live in their history. And actually, we need to live in the present. But we've always done it this way. That's how that kind of. So there is a lot of conditions, and young people don't like that very much. They like to be free. They like to challenge. My own teenage son is constantly challenging me all the time. Partly I think he's trying to make fun also, but also he's battling with some of the ideas. So I think the beauty of the work of the Brahmakumaris is that freshness, that originality, and the creativity. I mean, you know, some of the events that I saw downstairs, you know, there's an event about heroes. It's a very, in a way, a very simple and a very practical topic, but the way the BK are approaching that event, and you know, and the way they've developed it is really fascinating. And I think the world really needs that kind. We need to be creative about non-violence. And just like that video earlier, you know, which was kind of a rap video, it was so beautiful and so compassionate, and it gave a message, a very powerful message.
I mean, and as you work with business leaders and also as an educator, as a lecturer, are you finding, with all the diverse groups you work with in the community, that do you find the concept, the principle of non-violence, once people understand it, is easily accepted, or do they think it's just a philosophical idea, or that they can really bring it into their lives?
Well, I mean, generally speaking, business is very far from any concept of spirituality. You know, and business leaders especially. So it is quite hard work to get businesses to reflect, you know, to stop and reflect. But when I have succeeded, the effect has been truly transformative. You know, stories have started to appear in editorials of very prominent magazines. People have taken the conversations back into their organizations. I hear from a fourth and fifth person who had never even been to the temple or to that cultural experience, saying, I heard it was fascinating and what you did was, you know, that kind of thing. So the word kind of ripples out. But the reality is, unfortunately, business does work in a very kind of transactional mindset, and there are challenges.
Okay, thank you. And Sister Maureen, in your work, because obviously you've been inspired to put a lot of time and energy into different projects. So how have you seen non-violence work within those?
Well, actually, I was just going to comment on business in the sense that I'm going to do together with someone else who's in business, a presentation to a business conference next week, and it's connected with the environment and how, you know, sort of building up to the argument, if you like, or the communication that if we want to care for the environment, we need to change our mindset. And we haven't actually used the term non-violence actually, but obviously that's what it is, that's connected. And I think this is the thing, it's once someone has a shift in mindset or an epiphany of some kind, a lot of things can happen. And there's an example of a well-known carpet company in the States, Interface Carpets. Apparently they supply 45% of US carpet tiles. And the guy who's founded it and everything, he actually passed away a couple of years ago. But he had this epiphany about the environment, and he turned the whole company around to come to zero wastage, to use natural materials. People were happier, there were more profits, you know. I mean, it's just I'm not in business as that such, but it's just an example how if you apply that principle of not harming, it actually creates flourishing, you know, and abundance. But thinking about this, you know, I suppose maybe in our prison work, you know, I've seen this, and I was telling Atul the story of how I first got involved in prison work with a lot of resistance. Anyway, that's another story. But we've been working a lot with inmates in prison, and also with prison staff, and it's about, you know, helping people to reflect, to see that there's another way of doing things. And sometimes we'd have staff members come back to our retreats again and again, And one of these people who'd been for 2 or 3 retreats, a sort of unlikely person, prison officer, and then he was sharing his experience. He said, what I've learned here is that, because it's the whole philosophy of, you know, of course, what you're doing on the inside is going to have an impact on the outside. And he said that there was recently in the prison a control and restraint situation, you know, when a prisoner's violent and has to be restrained. And he said, normally I would be like the rest of the guys, you know, oh, come on, let's get him, and, you know, get on top and go, you know. But, okay, I had to do what I had to do in terms of restraining the prisoner. But he said afterwards, I went out into the grounds and I sat under a tree and I reflected and I said to myself, what went wrong that we had to restrain that prisoner? So he said that I thought about that situation completely differently. Instead of putting the blame, well, you know, that guy's to blame, he did something wrong, I said I reflected that what was my contribution to that situation? You know, what did I create in that way of dealing with that person, or, you know, whatever situation was going on in the prison. And so I think also non-violence brings in that aspect of personal responsibility, that I can't just say it's someone else's problem out there, but there's a reflection, what, you know, whatever's happening in me, I'm contributing in some way to that situation. And I think in today's society, of course I'm generalising, it's all about blame, not about somebody else, and all about my rights, but not about my responsibilities. I say I'm generalising, it's a big topic, but you know, there are many stories, I guess.
I mean, it can seem, taking isolated events, but it can seem very overwhelming, can't it? Because when you look at the aspects of non-violence or violence and peacelessness these days are spread all over the world, and they've crossed all different areas of our lives. You know, we've been talking a little bit about business and institutions, but also at the level of communities, at the level of families, at the level of schools and education. You know, even how we treat each other in these environments. You know, how do we? It's quite a subtle thing, isn't it? Violence. I'm quite interested to explore a bit more about the meaning of that, because we're not just talking about physically hurting someone. There are different forms of violence, and of course love is the solution, unconditional love is the solution, but maybe it's good to say a little bit about what you feel the different forms of violence are that we're facing, that we should be aware of, because sometimes we get blindsided and don't realise what violence constitutes, because it's such a strong word.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there is a lot of distant violence and remote control violence in today's society, that we actually may do or say something which can be very hurtful to somebody else, but we never see or experience the reaction. I mean, I guess the classic example is the drone and the remote control bombing technology that we have today. I mean, you know, so the person who presses the button never really sees or experiences the impact of that. And if we go back only 200-300 years ago, we had a very simple technology of violence, which was almost like one-to-one combat, right? Where whoever is participating in the violence actually experiences the whole thing, you know. Even if they kill somebody else, they're actually there to witness that killing and they experience that. But now, by actually through technology and through the power of, I mean, even if you look at submachine guns, right, one person can kill 30 people at the same time, almost like, you know, with a machine gun. So the power of technology is really very significant, and as a result, the chance of harm is very high, but also the kind of the learning that can come from that experience doesn't always happen. then the other subtle forms of violence. I mean, to me, it is, as a Jain, it's very clear that greed is a form of violence. But very few, I mean, especially multinational corporations and leaders would accept that. But you know, stock markets themselves are institutions which celebrate greed and encourage greed, and through those kinds of means, through very subtle ways, the values of business about profit maximization at any cost really influence the planet in a very, very significant way. And through that they create divisions, they create inequalities, there is exploitation, and effectively violence spreads. So there, unfortunately, as much as we would as individuals like to have peace in the world and to spread peace, the institutions that we have created, they are almost mechanistically, many of them are programmed to commit violence every day and to spread violence. I mean, the war machinery is another example. How can we have an army of over 1 million people and say that this army is for peace when everyone carries a gun? You know, I mean, just very, very simple things like that. Why is it that we don't have a ministry of peace? You know, we have a ministry of war called defense. And but you know, why is it that we don't have a ministry of peace? And then what about areas like mental health, for example? You know, this country has a huge mental health crisis, and we know that there are simple, practical solutions to build good mental health. You know, but there is no institution which positively promotes good mental health. You know, the only thing, I mean, it costs £20 billion a year to solve. In fact, it doesn't solve our mental health problem. All we do is give people medicines and drugs to kind of maintain it or try and control it, but we're not really curing the problem either. So, you know, as a society, it just beggars belief that why don't we do something positive and practical for the whole nation? You know, I mean, in a way, credit to the BK that, you know, through the leadership and initiative and the selflessness, we are doing it at a grassroots level all over the country. But why not the institution of government? That's the question I would ask.
Yes, that's a very big question. I think part of the reason, greed, very much the reason. I mean, why do we have, you know, what's behind war? It is greed. It's the arms race and the vast amounts of earning that come from the buying and selling of arms. And, you know, governments will say up front, I'm not selling arms to such and such a country, and then from the back door, they're selling the arms to that country. I mean, we all know the things that are going on. And I think the other thing is, you know, people tend to take, well, particularly governments, a very short-term view of everything. And I think when you're thinking about the whole concept of non-violence and not creating harm, you need to come out of your immediate narrow view of the present and think about the consequences of your actions. And so I may do something today that may help me today or for a week or whatever, but what can I do? How can I live in a way that's going to bring me happiness for my whole life? And also it's going to bring happiness to the people that I interact with. And I think when people start to adopt these values in life, they find a lot more inner happiness. You know, simple things like when somebody gets angry towards you, not just reacting in the way that they expect of you, because you're not using the inner resources that you have at that moment. You're only just reacting, and there's a loss because we have a lot of resources inside that we don't use. I remember a situation when there was somebody who was very upset with me one evening. Probably some of you heard me tell the story before. And he would say, oh, you do this and this and this, you know, he just got bugged by these things. And I was a bit surprised, known the person a long time, but I just listened. And I very consciously decided not to allow my thoughts to run, you know, why is he saying this, how can he speak to me like that, you know, the normal things, and try to justify yourself, you know. Even that is violence, actually. Because if you try to justify something, well, if there's truth, you don't need to justify it. So what am I justifying? Something inside me that's not right. And so I just listened and I just said, okay, I have love for you. You don't need to talk to me like this. Yes, but, you know, when somebody's fed up. Then I went home and then I reflected on what he'd said. And I thought, okay, one thing is right. I'm not doing the right thing. I have to change my behaviour. And then I thought the other two things are more his stuff, you know. I could see that it wasn't really, it was projection in that sense. But still, I didn't have any bad feeling about the person at all, actually. And then the next day again, it was going on. But then, because I didn't keep any bad feeling inside, I really still felt a lot of love for the person. Then he actually called me later on to apologise. And so on. I said, forget it, you know, end of story. But you know, where you don't come into that negative feeling, you create a space where something more positive can emerge. But where you get negative as well, you get angry, you're fueling it, and the violence increases. And of course, it can start off with angry words, but it can go further than that, you know. Although I don't think I would have got to a fist fight with anyone, but you know, but if you take it further, that's how wars, you know, because people react, and in reacting we lose our sense of dignity. And I feel that violence takes away a person's dignity completely, and they're no longer in control. And it's this, we want to control someone else's behaviour. And that there's no dignity in that. You can't control anybody anyway. You just give yourself a headache. But non-violence enables a very different dynamic in relationships. And I think that that's something that's very practical that we can all work with. And I know that when I've really not allowed my thoughts to go there to what this person's saying or doing, it's like there's no effect, or they change. I realise something, they realise something, but there's still that love is maintained. Love doesn't go away. It's so crucial. Yeah.
When we've sort of been covering the sort of bigger picture of world situations, and then you're sharing stories, obviously, of individual relationships.
Mm-hmm.
I know sometimes the bigger situations can just feel very overwhelming, but you know, so hearing examples of practically what we can do, because what I'm hearing from the bigger institutions is there is such a disconnect between cause and effect. You know, you were saying about, for instance, in terms of war, that now it's becoming more and more remote, so there's even less responsibility because you're not faced directly with the consequences of actions. And business institutions, you know, they're in their offices or their buildings and they're making decisions that are affecting communities and natural resources and everything else, so on all levels. But it's a good point perhaps to bring to this idea of what we can actually do personally, because I don't know, not these days, but I used to think that spiritual ideals were very philosophical, but I've learned that they're very, very practical, and I think it's very good for all of us to sort of explore what I can do in my own life to actually bring about more of a connection with unconditional love, more of a connection with peace, because from my experience these things transcend any belief system. I mean, we have two different faiths here, and I'm sure in the audience there's lots of different faiths, perhaps the odd atheist or two as well, but these ideals, they're common, aren't they? These ideals of peace and love and non-violence, you don't need to go to one particular belief system. They seem to run throughout humanity. So, can we explore that a little bit?
I think it's a very good question, and we could say that there are many things around us which happen, which kind of encourage us to almost get angry or get upset. Like, for example, we could drive out of here and we could immediately be in a traffic jam, or if we are not in a traffic jam, there's somebody at the back hooting or saying, come on, move fast so I can go, and things like that. So I think, what we all clearly need to do is to somehow have some kind of daily experience of peace, and almost build this kind of, and invest in this bank of peace, so that our inner threshold of love continues to stay fresh and continues to be built up. Because if we don't do that, the external forces are quite often negative. And in terms of practicalities, I mean, things like observing silence for a period every day, meditation, whichever technique you feel comfortable with, prayer, reflection. Sister Maureen just talked about reflection. I think that there are some very simple and very powerful techniques that we could all apply in our life to build that bank of peace and have peace. So.
I mean, Gandhi's well known for spending a lot of time reflecting on these principles before he took any action. Have you found in your own life that's been an empowering thing for you? That's because you've achieved a lot of good work yourself.
Yeah.
Is that where you get the power and the sort of will to be able to?
I think my real power comes from my childhood, in the sense that there was such a deep bank put into my childhood. A lot of my actions have been, I wouldn't say they've been very carefully planned or strategized. They've been quite spontaneous, but they've been from the inside out. But I was fortunate. But of course, the same thing does happen, that I do, if I don't practice, I do lose my rhythm, and I do, I can become angry, for example, or upset. But generally speaking, we're not used to, culturally not used to fighting, for example, so all those things do help.
Yes. I think the practice of silence is essential, and of course we meditate, and it's what this house is about a lot. And if you decided to come to this very venue tomorrow morning at 4 a.m, you can see people here, so welcome, an invitation. So we do start the day very consciously with that depth of silence and that connection with the source of peace, because we really do need to fill ourselves, because it's a very, very challenging world, and the forces of negativity are very, very strong, and so you have to be very, very clear about what it is that you need to do, what you really feel is right for you to do. And that's where you need courage. We were talking earlier that non-violence is for the brave, it's not for the weak. I have to use that phrase, and I always feel you need the courage that we need is not the courage to face something in a sense, but it's the courage to stay true to your principles, and not to allow any situation or anyone to move you from that. And you also need a lot of faith, because you may think, well, if I don't give in, if I don't compromise, what about my job? What about, there could could be, you know, really big questions. But I really do believe that if you stick to the principles of truth, then the consequence of that can only be more goodness. And sometimes it can feel like a step in the dark, but you know that what else can you do? In a way you see people, well, like Gandhi was such an example, things happen that are much greater than, you know, that they take one step and the effect is multiplied many times because of the power of those principles. And I know very often I've set up upon tasks that are quite scary for me, you know, but I felt that no, if this is something God wants me to do, if this is something I'm being asked to do, I'm going to get the power to do it, and, you know, and then you just can't believe the things that happen, and you know that you've become an instrument at that moment. Okay, going off into lots of different directions, but we need a tremendous will inside. We need to build up that strength every day. And you use the word bank. I like that very much. A bank of peace, the bank of strength. Because while everything seems okay, and there's not too many difficulties, that's the time to really build up the strength, so that you have a reservoir, like you mentioned, and so that at that moment when the difficulties come to you, you've got something to draw on. You're not at that time then trying to say, well, where do I get the strength of mind from? It's,
I mean,
that will is there.
Even retreats are very powerful for this, you know, and I don't know if you know, but there are many people in this country who don't even have an idea of the concept of retreat, let alone...
Or of silence.
Or of silence, yeah, or of silence.
They have to keep, you know.
So, but when they do go, I've noticed, I mean, we used to organize retreats in the young Jains as well. I mean, you know, in the week, I mean, the transformation is huge. You know. So, I mean, another example that comes to mind, Mahatma Gandhi, one of his great strengths was whenever he read something which he felt was good and worth practicing, he immediately launched an experiment on it. His autobiography is called My Experiments with Truth. And you know, he read lots of different religions, he would read books on health, on science, etc. And I read that as a young person when we had started the Young Jains. And I thought this is a good idea, so we started a series of experiments with Jainism, so taking different principles of Jainism, and as a group of young people experimenting with them. So the one we did on Ahimsa was, we said, right, for 7 days, right, we agreed as a group together that for 7 days we will test the principle of non-violence in 21st century London. Is it real? Is it practical? Does it work? And the way we will do that is we will make a vow that for 7 days, whatever the situation, we will not get angry. Even if we feel angry, we will not. But we will practice 1 hour of silence every day for 7 days. We will do some quiet reading 1 hour a day and reflection 1 hour a day. We designed a few techniques around that. And then we asked everyone to keep a diary, a daily diary of their experience. And then at the end of the experiment, we came together as a group to feel what non-violent meant to us as individuals and whether we felt collectively that this was a valid principle which was not just theoretical but practical in modern society. So I mean, you know, we can do that with the young people, you know, even today. It's
any age group. It is this thing of practice. If you don't try something out, you will never know. And I know at one point, some of you met Daddy Janki, the head of our organisation. You know her, she's 97 and tremendous energy. And a few years ago, she started telling us this thing. She said, don't think. And I said, what do you mean, don't think? And she said, you all think too much. You know, something happens and you think about it. You think about the past, think about people, you know. And when we tend to think a lot, you know, they're not always the most pleasant of thoughts, you know. And then this whole thing about don't waste your time, don't waste your energy, put a full stop to your thoughts. So I really began practicing that, and it's quite amazing. I mean, I slip back quite often, but you know, when you actually don't think too much about a situation, but just think as much as you need to, you're far more likely to bring goodness and virtue into the situation, because too many thoughts seem to mask your inner being. You know, there's a lot of confusion in your head. And sometimes if something's happened, and I've done this a few times, it's been unpleasant, and I've said, no, I'm not going to think about it. And then I would also say, hand it over to God, finish, because if I think about it, it'll get worse in my head, it'll get worse for them. And it's like magic. If you don't put the energy of your thoughts in something, it doesn't grow. And you know, and so that's the thing, that if, you know, when we think too much, it also becomes a subtle form of violence. We're making something much bigger than it needs to be.
So this is where the real work is then. Because sometimes when people talk about pacifism, which is sometimes linked to non-violence, it sounds a bit like passive. But from what I'm getting here, actually, there's a lot of work going in. It talks about courage, a lot of energy goes into that, determination, but also this inner work, which is now coming up now, this work we need to do to develop our awareness, to reflect on how we're affecting ourselves and other people. It's interesting what you're saying about thoughts, because it's a sort of self-violence, isn't it? When we start to, you know, self-critical thoughts, when we think too much.
Self-critical thoughts, absolutely. You know, we saying earlier that, you know, that first violence we do is that violence of suppressing our innate wisdom, our innate goodness. And actually, whatever situation, whatever difficulty or problem there is, if we reflect deeply and you get in touch with you emerge your inner wisdom, you actually have the solution inside.
Does everyone have this deeply, this inner wisdom?
Absolutely, yes. Completely. I haven't met anyone who hasn't. They might have forgotten they have it, but they have it. Well, that's what I understand. I don't want to comment on that.
No, I think you said very, very good things, and yeah, it is really important. We cannot relax our pedal about non-violence just because of the kind of environment, society, and times that we live in. But then, you know, it sounds a bit like effort. That we have to make an effort to be silent, we have to make an effort to meditate. But once we do get into the swing of it, that it is a joy, and we begin to experience. You know, it may not come immediately, but it does come, and there is a kind of an inner peace.
You know, when you experiment with something like that, you find it works. You feel very empowered, very energized, because you feel you're learning something, you're moving forward. So, like you said, it doesn't seem like an effort then. It's something you want to do, you want to have more.
So before we put the questions to the audience, do you have any final sort of tips, practical tips? If somebody is thinking, okay, I'd like to start feeling less angry, less greedy, less upset, less unhappy, less peaceless from tomorrow, what tips would you give from your own experience, things that can actually help to make a real difference in life? Because what's coming across is actually a lot of the problems seem very complex. You're both saying actually it comes down to this inner work. So what can I do starting tomorrow, even if it's not quite at 4 a.m.?
Yeah, I mean, whenever you feel, whenever you have time, whenever you have 10 minutes, even to sit in silence, meditate, reflect, that's a small start. And depends on the intensity of the urge, but definitely not to think that just by thinking I want to be non-violent, I will become non-violent. There are lots of people who think that once I get the idea, that's it, that's all I need to do. After that, everything will be easy. It is a practice, and it does need working on it. I mean, lots of areas, like in our community, we have festivals, whole festival. We just had the Pollution Festival, which is 8 days dedicated to forgiveness, which is another side of non-violence. And I find that festival so energizing because it kind of brings we do it collectively as a community. We have a series of fasts and rituals around it. But I feel kind of, having done it, it gives me an injection for another year ahead, kind of thing. So take part in retreats, in longer periods of silence. I once done 8 days of silence, and I did it at the time when I was giving the maximum lectures in my life. So people found it very surprising, but I thought, if I'm lecturing, I need silence. And that helps you to measure your words. That helps you to filter your thoughts, and it is tough. In fact, when I broke those 8 days of silence, the nun who came to my house said, "Okay, now speak." And I couldn't speak. Because do you know how much energy it takes to speak? How much energy your body uses just to speak? We don't know, because we do it all the time. But when you actually stop, that's when you realize that even speech takes energy and effort.
Practical tips.
Practical tips for tomorrow. Why wait till tomorrow? Do it now. But yes, definitely those pauses of silence, and something that, very important to start the day with silence, because then you have a better chance of keeping up with your mind, or keeping the master of your mind. Otherwise, the mind can easily run away with us. So starting the day with silence is very, very helpful. And maybe read something, like I was saying, some good thoughts, some affirmations, something that feeds the mind and intellect with something nourishing spiritually. And then throughout the day, we have this habit of, we call it just a minute, or we call it traffic control at times, controlling the traffic of your thoughts, of taking a minute each hour. And it's like a recharging. And it actually, a lot of people use this method, and it really is very, very effective. So even just that 1 minute, and usually every hour through the day, music will play in this house, and we will stop whatever we're doing and just be in that silence. And you keep replenished in that way. And then at the close of the day, to kind of put a closure to your day. And I like to look back, and I don't think about, oh, I did this, and why did I do that. I rather frame the question, well, what did I learn? What have I, what has today given me that can help me to move forward another step? And that way you put closure to the day, so you don't sleep with regrets or, why did I do that? Why did this person do this? But you put closure so that you can have a sound sleep and start the day afresh. It's very important. And I think, you just have to say to yourself, let me try. Sometimes we give up before we even try something, which is a little bit silly, actually. So at least if you're going to give up after trying. But you'll find that if you try it, you'll actually want to continue with it. So, just do it, as that famous line says.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so I think there's a microphone, and it'd be great for 5 or 10 minutes to just take some questions. Anybody? This gentleman over here? Oh, there's a few. Okay, let's Julie sort it out.
My question is to Dr. Shah. According to Jainism, the non-violence is quite extreme, that one should not harm the microorganism or any living person or entity. So, like even walking, eating is an act of violence, or I will go to the extreme that even the existence is an act of violence. So how far one can go to practice the non-violence?
Well, I mean, there are different codes of conduct for monks and nuns and for lay people. And monks and nuns, for example, aren't allowed to wear shoes, they aren't allowed to travel in a car, they have to walk bare feet, they have to be nomadic, and they are also, they have to beg for the food or seek alms. So it's a much more stricter life. For lay people, some injury is accepted, but again, there should be an attempt to minimize injury. And that's why also we have all these prayers, the forgiveness prayers, because we do hurt and we do harm. Now, you use the word extreme non-violence, that in the Jain tradition there is a kind of, the method is extreme. Extreme depends on which angle you look at it as, right? I mean, Jains would themselves, probably many of them would not say this is extreme. They will say this is the right thing to do and the right way to live. And the outcome of that extremity, let me tell you the other way. The outcome of that extremity is today the Jains are one of the most successful communities in the world, and by success I don't just mean material success, I mean success in terms of professionalism, education, in terms of leadership. And what happens is when you have a very disciplined life, when you have a life whose core philosophy is that I do not want to hurt anybody, what happens is you automatically become a leader. You automatically become a role model. People get drawn towards you, they want to work with you. And this is an everyday story for Jains. I've traveled all over the world and met them. It's just incredible. But it's because of the culture and the tradition that they've inherited and the kind of values that they've inherited and that they live by. So, I don't think it's extreme, but yes, I have met many people who say it is extreme. It's idealistic, yes, but then the leaders are born of idealism. Mahatma Gandhi was one of the greatest idealists of his time. Look what he brought.
You probably touched on this already, but I just wanted to comment on some of the businesses the multinationals do and how they exploit people, especially in the third world countries. This is also a form of violence. The example I was going to give was they used to promote a health drink which aids recovery. Now, in many of the underdeveloped countries or developing countries, the price was pretty hefty, and people they were brainwashed into thinking that this drink really will help you recover. So they used to save up very hard and buy this drink without realizing that all it contains was just water and sugar. Now this, I believe, is extreme form of violence, extreme form of exploitation. And in this process, not only the multinationals, but various other people are involved, the distributors, the retailers,
Yeah, unfortunately, what has happened to multinational corporations is that they've actually become soulless. They have no soul. I don't know if you saw recently the questioning of Google and Ernst & Young in Parliament, in the House of Commons, about their tax avoidance practices, because they don't pay any taxes, basically. And when you saw the drama of that, the Google sent a vice president of sales to face the House of Commons committee. I mean, that immediately tells you how much face the leadership has. And then Ernst & Young sent one of their tax partners, and I mean, all the time he was kind of mumbling, you know, and he was saying, well, hypothetically speaking, this would be our answer. So when you see these kind of so-called blue chip organizations being questioned, I mean, this is a very rare, they are never questioned or challenged about what they really believe, about what they really mean by their actions. But when you watch this drama, you realize that these organizations actually have no face. All they are interested in is money and making it in every which way. And yes, by the way, through advertising and through image building, they would like to have a brand and they would like to give an impression that they are a good company, an ethical company, etc., etc. But when you actually go under the veil and when you see them in front, so that's the reality. And you know, so an act like what you're saying, when multinationals do that, it's no one person doing it, but it's a group of people, and it's that whole machinery of profit which is doing it. And therefore nobody also takes responsibility. Nobody has a conscience. You know, if you and I, if we did it as individuals, somewhere our conscience would be pricked, you know. But here you have a whole system, a whole organization without any conscience.
Just like to say that it is this thing of a whole culture, and to go against that is difficult. But you know, been involved in a forum in Iceland last year, and you know, Iceland was a very interesting example. When the financial crash happened, they actually let their banks fail, and they didn't act. They said, well, you know, we're victims of this culture that's been created, and so we're not going to pay back the money, and we're not going to prop up the banks. And if you see Iceland now, and I've been going a few times, they brought themselves up, and they actually had a forum in the country where I think it was 10% of the population took part to actually discuss what are the values that we want for our community. And you don't see people who are depressed. You see people who are bringing themselves up, and actually one of the consequences of that is that they're saying that in general family life is better, teenagers are happier because the parents don't have money to go out and spend, and they're spending more time at home. And okay, it's a little country, a small population, but there are principles here to look at. And I think people just think that's the only way to do things. There are other ways of doing things. There always is another way. And that's not just, you know, applicable to me in my interaction with somebody, but it's also applicable to a nation, a community, a nation, a region. But somebody has to make a start and say, okay, we're going to do things differently. So yes, I'm an idealist, definitely. But I've seen things which you would think are impossible becoming possible. So I believe that can be possible for more people in situations that you would not imagine.
Okay, I think we've got time maybe just for one more.
Okay, thank you very much, Sister Jenti, Dr. Shai, Brother Matthew, Maureen. Sister Maureen, sorry.
I know we get mixed up at times.
Sorry, a bit nervous.
That's all right.
Yeah, I mean, what I've picked up, it's fascinating listening to all you. Really grateful for this conversation. And what I've picked up is that the roots of non-violence are probably from thought processes. And you've given some really good practical tips. You suggested reflection, conscious periods of silence. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what I can do about that. So thank you for all those pointers towards that. What I want to touch upon is something that came that you kind of touched upon at the very start, and it comes up anytime we talk about Gandhi as well, I guess Mahatma Gandhi. And another way, but I guess what we all have to try to do is harness, cultivate somehow this our non-violent nature, our more compassionate nature, somehow cultivate it. And so you've suggested meditation and periods of silence and reflection. I think they're extremely important and easier said than done, but yeah, hopefully we can all go away and work on those. One other thing I just wanted to put to the table is when you talked about, earlier on you talked about non-violence to all living beings. And I'm just thinking, I know certain Eastern philosophies, that is one way that is also considered as a way to cultivate our compassionate side, by consciously projecting the non-violence, the more compassion to all living beings, so even insects, animals, etc. And it's something that we seem to do less and less of as time goes on in this world. Brother Matthew mentioned disconnect, and Dr. Shah mentioned remote controlled violence, etc. So yeah, I just wanted to put that to the table about all living beings, about animals as well. So yes, we project our compassion towards fellow human beings, but if we also, if we consciously project it more towards other living beings, that will surely have an effect on how we interact with our fellow human beings as well. Just wanted your comments on those sort of things.
I mean, I think we forgot to mention diet, of course. A non-violent diet is part of active non-violence. Thanks for reminding us about that. Maharshi is very active in the vegan movement, and there the diet also excludes dairy or any animal product, including dairy. And it's very, very true. I mean, we say you are what you eat, right? In my case, I was born a vegetarian, so I guess I've never known any different. And that's probably why I didn't even say it. But yeah, diet definitely is a very important factor.
Yeah, no, I've been vegetarian for about 40 years probably, and it's a very good way to live. Of course, it's healthier, definitely, although people tell you other things, but it is a healthy way to live. Our digestive tracts are not built to digest meat, but anyway, that's part of it. But also this thing that it really is a question of living with non-violence, because one is if the world became vegetarian, then forget about air travel. I mean, I haven't got the statistics to quote you, but the carbon emissions from meat production way outstrips, air travel, road travel, so many things. But of course, because of vested interests, vegetarianism is not promoted as much. But it's actually a very simple answer to the environmental crisis that we're facing. But also, we look at it as well with this thing of if you kill a being and then you eat that meat or fish or egg or whatever, you're not only taking in material that is not suited to your body, but you're taking in the vibrations of violence that is contained in that flesh. And then that is going to directly affect your mind. And so we practice that vegetarian lifestyle for all of those reasons, for compassion, definitely, but also for the fact that for spiritual well-being as well. And when you think about a world that kills to eat, then you can understand why there's so much violence in the atmosphere, and it's very, very unnatural.